Happy Sunday. Getting ready for Monday? I know I am. I hope you get a chance to look at my other videos because I think that you'll find them quite interesting. What is my spiel tonight? Last night I heard an argument with the baby boomers are getting blamed for all the world's mess. Are they to blame? First things, I'm Generation X, so my generation came after the baby boomers. So that Generation X is 65 to 80. But here's how the generations go from the last 100 years. You had the GI generation, which I believe went from 1917 to 1910 to 1924. That was the World War II era. They were the greatest generation. Then you had the Silence generation, 1928, 1944. My mother's part of that generation. She was born in 44. The Silent generation was too young for World War II. They got their first action in Korea, but then became too old for Vietnam. So, of all the conflicts, they were mostly impacted by Korea. Then, of course, you had the baby boomers, 46 to about 65, but you can even break up the baby boomers from the older baby boomers from 46 to 53, and then 53 to 65. The second part of the baby boomers, I have heard it's called Generation Jones. So you have two parts of the baby boomers. And then, of course, you have Generation X, then the millennial generation, 81 to about 96, to around the not 1996, but around 2000. And then after that, of course, you have Generation Z. And I work with many people. My nephew's Generation Z. They're getting very frustrated. They grew up without understanding the troubles and problems that the previous generations went through. Of course, in the greatest generation, they went through World War II and dealing with the aftermath. The silent generation were children during the Depression and World War II. They didn't fight, but they saw a lot on the home front. And then you had the baby boomers, where it happens with the baby boomers. They grew up in the most stable period of the time. Of course, you had the fear about nuclear weapons, but economically and socially, we were advancing between 1945 and 1970. So they took a huge advantage of that stability and changes in our society. Generation X, this is where the problem started. We grew up in a time when parents were divorcing, latchkey kids, the economy was stagnated in the 70s, called stagflation, which we have now. Then you had the early 80s. Things got stabilized around 1983. Of course, we went through the boom 80s, and that's when all the computer and the Generation X adapted to computer technology. Then, of course, the millennials, they went through the boom 80s and 90s. Those were absolutely the great years. And again, just like the baby boomers, those were the years of stability. The Soviet Union collapsed. The U.S. reached new highs in productivity and new opportunities for both women, men, and anyone else to get in the job field and develop their careers. Those were the great opportunity years. Then what Generation Z was what comes after September 11th. You grew up with a more advanced technology, social media, terrorism alerts, Middle East crisis, the diminishing job opportunities, and after you watched and read about the previous generations, and you're not able to buy a house. That's true. So each generation, but I will say the Generation Z gets it the worst. They coming at when the diminishing returns from the previous generation. That's what you get, and I'm sorry about that. But the one thing Generation Z has in its ballpark is its ability to adapt to technology and social media. and artificial intelligence, which is the future. So that's what you have in your court. Now, where are we headed? I wish I had a crystal ball and tell you. The wars continue. It doesn't look like the war in the Middle East is anytime soon, or Ukraine war is anytime soon. We are in probably the worst international environment since the 1930s. And the same thing goes with the financial. The stock market goes up and down. Volatile. It's very volatile since the 30s. For Generation X, we got some of it in the 70s when our parents came home and they told us we didn't have a job. And in 82, we saw a lot of families break up and divorce, single mothers, fathers not paying child support, or other people not paying child support, and we got really hit hard. In fact, if I had to compare generations, the silent generation and Generation X is probably the most closest together, because the silent generation grew up, with the exception of Korea. They grew up in the 30s and 40s, in which the World War II and the Depression. Then they grew up, and of course Korea, and then they grew up in the prosperous 50s and 60s. My generation Z grew up in Vietnam era, the stagnation of the 70s, and then of course at the end, the boom. Everything started to improve around 1983. So I consider Generation X and the silent generation very close to each other. Now this goes back to the other generations are blaming the baby boomer generation for all our problems. It's a very complicated situation, because not all baby boomers are down in Florida sipping champagne or mimosas on the beach in Miami Beach. Many of them are struggling. There's a lot of them, and a lot of them took advantage of the boom years of the 80s and 90s to really save and develop their careers. And that was the baby boom generation. Yes, a lot of them did. And now we have but there were structural changes that happened in those times too. A lot of the defined pensions went away. A lot of what the silent generation and the greatest generation had was gotten away with. There was corporate mergers, structural changes, and of course the baby boomers did benefit from those structural changes as well. And our education system was not very good, to be honest with you. We used to have a great we had our public school systems, I won't say the best in the world, but but they really started to decline in the 70s. And so where we are today, the frustration because of automation and the blaming of each generation. If I have to say anything about baby boomer generation, not all of them were wealthy, but I do think that those that really benefited from the 80s and 90s think too much of themselves, like they were superheroes that saved it all. No, you didn't. So let's put some things straightly. The baby boomers did not create the civil rights movement. When the Civil Rights Movement Act of 64 came around, you were 18 years old, and that was started and was fought by the silent generation and earlier generations. You only inherited the 64 Civil Rights Act. Then you like to say that we adopted the business. What you also adopted is neoliberalism, which means you then started killing the opportunity for everyone to have the piece of the price. In fact, you sold off a lot of what your parents fought for. And it may be true that sometimes things change, but you embrace that neoliberal position, and this is the situation we have today. So those are the people that really took advantage of it. And don't get too much into your, don't get too confident and blame everyone else, because honestly, you had it all and you chose to keep it all. This is only for those baby boomers that got rich in the 80s and 90s, and you know what happened too. I think eventually there is going to be another crisis coming along between this whole wealth transfer. I think, if I had to say, is that as the baby boomers, they're fighting to maintain living as long time, and this is again what is causing intergenerational warfare. And that's not going to be good for the health of our economy. Normally, in normal times, it would have been the baby boomers would retire, younger generations would move up and take their place, but that's not happening. And why? Because again, a lot of those baby boomers that chose to go into debt can't retire, and then there's some who just don't want to retire because they don't want to retire because they don't know what to do. So my view of what baby boomers are the entirety of blame? No, there was a lot of demographic and economic changes, but I will say this: there's a big lot of baby boomers that took advantage, encouraged the economic changes, and that harmed a lot of people and this generation. And this is not going to end well, because I can tell you there's a lot of frustration out there. And those baby boomers that benefit need to ask them what I could have done better towards other generations. You kept it all to yourself. Goodbye.